Good morning, and thank you, Catherine, for the introduction, and what a fabulous turnout here in Christchurch. Just to echo what Catherine said, it's great for the guys that have turned up and the support that we've had from the NZMEA and actually from them and their members in actually supporting this event this morning. I guess these events actually are quite important. Health and safety is pretty much getting further and further up the headlines in New Zealand. I guess it all stems from the tragedy occurred where we had 29 miners lose their life in Pike River, and the whole health and safety system in New Zealand sort of got put under the forensic microscope and sort of explored around the questions of, is the current system still fit for purpose for New Zealand? And I guess both the Commissioner Inquiry and the Independent Task Force came back with conclusions saying, no, it's not. There's some fundamental changes that need to be made for that to happen. And so we are embarking on a raft of reforms that have been approved by the government, one of which was you got a new agency, WorkSafe New Zealand. We're just over a year old now. So hopefully a lot of you are getting used to the new brand. It's a standalone agency. It has a board. All this is new territory for the health and safety regulator in New Zealand. Before, we've been hidden in quite large government departments. I think we were the Department of Labour for nearly 100 years. Then we became part of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and then soon after the changes occurred, and now we have WorkSafe New Zealand. And a lot of investment's been put into WorkSafe New Zealand as regards increasing both its capacity and its capability to be able to do its function. It's got brand new leadership, and there's certainly a drive and a passion for us to be as good a regulator as we can be. The theme of my talk today is pretty much giving you a bit of a heads up around why we're focusing on manufacturing as a regulator, and more importantly, when our inspectors are deployed to visit the sector, the sort of things that inspectors are looking for. And I guess that's a useful way for you guys to actually get a bit of a heads up on the sort of things that may need to be important on your agenda as regards things you should be putting attention to. So as regards the first question, which is around why the manufacturing sector, Catherine's touched on quite nicely that there's four priority sectors that seem to contribute to 70% of the New Zealand work toll. And manufacturing, along with agriculture, forestry and construction, are the four major industries that do that. And I guess those industries have no surprise to people as regards the nature of those industries and the volume of people actually working there. In fact, the manufacturing sector is probably the biggest employer. I think it may have recently been pushed by the retail sector, perhaps, as regards the biggest employer, but 250,000 workers in New Zealand actually operating within that manufacturing sector. So it is a huge sector. And with that comes some challenges, because it's also a very diverse sector. It's made up of various different types of sub-industries, and ranging from quite large employers to a very large number of small to medium-sized employers. Over the past 5 years, there's been more than 126,000 claims made to ACC, and there's been a further 13,500 severe claims in that 5-year period. That's led to a total cost of 157.9 million in ACC cost terms. And I guess that provides some big numbers. I guess it shows the sort of gravity of the issues that we have in manufacturing. But there's also the hidden risk there, which is also around the significant large number of people that actually are dying prematurely from illnesses and diseases that are acquired from their workplace. It's estimated, and again, we can only work on estimations, that between 600 to 900 workers a year in New Zealand are actually dying from occupationally acquired illnesses and disease. So that's asbestosis, silicosis, different forms of cancers that are from some of the substances they use. And the manufacturing sector has a large number of processes that are well known to actually include products and harmful substances that actually can then lead to those types of diseases. So what I want to sort of spend time on is actually walking you through some of the key areas that we're going to be focusing on, but also showing a huge emphasis that we do need to shift our attention not just onto the safety, but also the health side of work within your own workplaces. I mentioned before, it is a very diverse sector. However, despite its diversity, there are four common types of injuries that tend to occur within the manufacturing sector. A lot of them are related to the manual handling of items within the workplace. That's probably where the highest volume of claims come for ACC. Being hit or being cut, but with using hand tools. Give you an example of that, I would say in the meat processing industry or the fish processing industry. A lot of that's knife type injuries, but we are getting still a lot of injuries with people using hand tools and having quite severe lacerations. Caught and trapped in machinery, I guess these are the frequent type of accidents that get notified to us as serious harm accidents. And it's by no surprise that we have quite an emphasis on the safe use of machinery, around making sure machine guarding is in place, and I'm obviously going to spend a bit of time on bringing you up to speed on where things are at with machinery-related matters. And then finally, being hit by falling objects. We're finding that say in the loading and unloading of vehicles, and also racking and things like that, we are getting a lot of people actually injured, and actually this is one area where some of the fatalities have been occurring within the manufacturing sector, where people have been struck by heavy items that have fallen down. So the safe use of machinery, last year we launched a new best practice guide. That's the document that you've got on your chairs this morning. It was a long time in the making. We had a lot of outdated guidance in place prior to that, which wasn't very helpful to business or to the industry, and it certainly wasn't helpful for our inspectors that knew that things had to be improved with machine guarding, but not having good quality guidance then to be able to refer to and also help the employers with. So last year we launched the new best practice guide. It's a significant document. I guess the purpose of that document is aimed at both the decision makers and decision influencers. And what I mean by that is the people who sign the checks as regards the investments that's made on upgrading plants within their factory, and also those people who are actually influencing those decisions, be it the safety practitioner, be it the engineer, be it senior managers within there. And so the way that document's been structured it provides useful information to help both those types of people within the business. It's got a lot of flow charts in there, and this is some of the feedback that we got from the industry group that was involved in the development of the guideline, was that because there's some critical decisions that need to be made, it's best to sort of display that in flow charts. And so you'll see throughout the whole document a whole series of flow charts that help to pull that information together. It also contains information talking about how to put health and safety into your business case, talking about terms like return on investment, which are not common terms used by a health and safety regulator, but are common terms that are used by business. And again, I'm just illustrating this is where working in collaboration with the industry and with businesses, hopefully that guidance starts becoming a bit more fit for purpose. However, it is a very big document. You know, it's got a lot of technical information. And if I was a small to medium-sized business, it's not going to really be a big turn-on for me to turn over the pages of a 140-page booklet. So we had to sort of think a bit more smartly around how can we present information to a small to medium-sized business so that they're not going to be overwhelmed, but it's enough for them to sort of start to get to gist with what they need to do. Hence why you've now got the toolkit. And so hopefully you see there's a copy of this toolkit on your seat. And what we've tried to do is actually making an abridged version of that best practice guide into this format. And so it's made up of a series of information sheets. And so if you've got it in front of you, let's open it up, and let's have a look. On the inside cover, you'll see there's like a little coloured chart. And basically that is a very simple basic system that we're applying to machine guarding, but actually can be applied to any sort of health and safety matter that's in your workplace. So starting off with identifying the hazards, assessing the risks, putting control measures in place, applying the hierarchy of control, which that eliminates, isolate, minimize, documenting the outcome of those things, and also providing information to your employees, and then finally having systems in place which you're monitoring and checking to make sure the good things that you've put in place are still effectively controlling the risks that your workers are exposed to. In there then is a series of information sheets, and you'll notice that they're also colour-coded to actually match the various stages of that process. The first of the tools in there is actually a very simple checklist. So if you're not sure about where to start, the starting point would be to actually start going through that checklist and use this as an opportunity to actually engage with your workers and actually get the workers involved in that process, to actually, as part of one of your toolbox talks or your safety meetings, to actually go through that checklist and start identifying where the things that you're doing well and the things perhaps where you need to be making improvements. And from that, you can then generate quite a simple little action plan that will keep you focused on the things that you need to be putting right. Finally, what we've also done is I guess there's a lot of different types of machines out there, and I guess small businesses don't want to be looking through a 140-page worth document, which is only based on the principles of machine guarding. When they're looking at, I've got a particular machine, what guarding do I need to put on a particular machine? So what we've done is we've produced just over 40 individual fact sheets for different types of machines. Now, it's not every single machine, but we've picked the sort of the 40 common ones so far, and what you've got down here, we've got them grouped under the headings of metal, wood, food, plastics, printing, and general. And we've got the sort of gimmicky sort of QR code. So if you've got a smartphone, that will take you to the web page where those are stored. If I'm just talking gobbledygook to you about QR codes, you don't know what I'm talking about, simply go into WorkSafe's web page and actually go into our safe use of machinery part of that homepage. You'll see all those listed there. Now, the beauty of those fact sheets, and I haven't got one here to show you at the moment, but what they do is actually break down the tasks that are commonly done on that type of machine, identifying the hazards and the potential harms that can occur, but more importantly, on the right-hand side, it lists the control measures that need to be in place for that type of machine. So as a small business, a lot of the thinking's done for you. All it requires you to do is actually go through those list of control measures and make sure that you've got those in place for that machine in your workplace. So if these aren't things that you've been familiar with up to now as regards to these fact sheets and that, please take time from after this morning to actually go and actually search those out and actually print off those ones that are relevant to your workplace. So when the inspectors visit, I guess the best way to sort of illustrate to you what the inspector's going to be doing when they come to your workplaces is yes, they're going to have some knowledge around machine guarding, but don't always view them as the machine guarding expert or the expert in health and safety. What they're coming to ascertain is how much do you understand about the risks, the health and safety risks within your business? How much knowledge do you have around the control measures that really should be on that particular machine? Because at the end of the day, it's the business that's actually creating the risk. They own the risks, and the responsibility to ensure that the workers that are exposed to those risks aren't going to be harmed at the end of the day, so everyone goes home safe at the end of their shift. So what the inspector's wanting assurances from you as an employer is, have you got knowledge around the potential things that are going to cause people harm? Have you actually conducted a risk assessment so you know where the risks are within your workplace? And once you've done your risk assessment, what control measures you've got in place? So as regards machinery, we'll certainly be wanting to make sure that you've got the right types of guards in the right places, or if there are things which are old machines and you're looking to upgrade them, certainly we want to be seeing signs of what your investment plan is as regards upgrading those machines so that you are going to get them ultimately safeguarded, and then what interim measures you've got whilst you're waiting for that investment to come through. The other thing that we're interested in is making sure you've got good, safe systems of work. Now, one of the common activities which people are getting caught out with machinery isn't normally when the operator's working at normal operating times. It's when the machine has a jam or the machine needs to be repaired. And it's either when clearing that jam or cleaning that machine down, or the maintenance guy having to do a repair on the machine. That is where a high volume of the machinery-related accidents are occurring. And the reason being is because people then are having to remove guards to access where the jam is or where the repair needs to be done. And if they haven't done if they haven't taken necessary safeguards to make sure that they're safe whilst doing that, i.e. turning the machine off, isolating the machine, or having guards which are interlocked, so when you do remove the guard, the machine automatically stops anyway, so when you're clearing the jam, you're not at risk. If you haven't got those sort of things in place, then yes, 8 times out of 10 the person may get away with it. But unfortunately, machinery can be very unforgiving, and the number of people in New Zealand that have been mutilated, lost body parts in machinery, or even lost their life in a machine is still a horrendous number. And our knowledge around machine guarding is certainly high enough that these things shouldn't actually be happening. So one of the things that we'd want to be having assurances of is, what are your safety procedures for when you are doing clearing, cleaning or maintenance work? What steps, what training have you given people to make sure that they're following that? And more importantly, what supervision have you taken to make sure that people are following those procedures correctly? And that does lead then into, what information are you providing people? Don't assume that people understand the risks that they're facing, or the steps that they need to always take. It's important for you to actually spell that out to people and actually put it into terms which actually they can understand. Companies I've seen this do well use a lot of pictures, take time in toolbox talks to talk it through, get group discussions going, get people actually involved in some of the decisions around the safeguards that are put in place. And that higher level of engagement does lead to a higher level of safety performance, both from management but also from the workers as well. The tools that are in that toolkit also will help you a long way around that information provision, because it will give you some tips and tricks and the type of information you need to give. There's one particular sheet that also provides you some topics that you can use as part of toolbox talks at your safety meeting. So if your safety meeting pretty much comprises how many accidents you've had in the previous period, and has anyone got any safety concerns, and that's your health and safety meeting, then it's probably not the most engaging discussion you can have. The health and safety meetings are actually a good opportunity to get some good engaging conversations around the real things that are actually going to put people at risk. And so the tools that we've got in there are things that can help you to facilitate a far better outcome with your safety meetings. So the other thing we'll be asking you is, how often do you actually look for inadequate safeguards on some of your machines? How often are you reviewing the machine guarding that you've got currently? And how often are you looking for guards that are actually failing due to lack of maintenance, or the guards actually being removed? And sometimes these things can occur. You know, I hear stories that the night shift would routinely remove a guard off a particular machine because no bosses are around to watch them, and so the guard was seen as a hindrance to production, and so they thought, well, the bosses are always on about get the figures up as regards the volume of output, so if we remove this guard, then surely we're doing the right thing because we're getting our production levels up. If that is the sort of practices or the sort of culture that's occurring in your workplace, these are the sort of things that you do need to be quite vigilant on, and actually making sure that you are positively dealing with. You also need to make sure that you're regularly checking that the control measures, their performances don't deteriorate. So the inching control and other types which rely on a particular speed for that moving part to work when it's in that particular control measure. The last thing you want is for it to be quicker than it is normally, or that the response of the E button is far too slow compared to the speed in which the person can get to the danger part and things like that. So again, having regular maintenance and people checking out the performance of these devices is important. And also making sure that the safe system of work, you know, how often are you checking that those are actually being followed as you've prescribed. Human beings do cut corners, and I think you've always got to keep that in mind. You know, so if someone can forget to follow a step, the reality is sometimes they will. And if it's a critical step, then you need to make sure that you've got other systems in place to try and avert that from happening. Finally, around machinery, you've also got to think around the health effects. And the law does require that you do have systems in place for monitoring people's health, so that there's an early detection to see if control measures are actually failing and that people are being exposed to harmful effects of work. And so noise and vibration, solvents and dust, fumes, biological agents, other hazardous substances, asbestos and lead. Again, if you've got these types of hazards in your workplace, then you also need to be making sure that you've got systems in place in which you're monitoring people's health so that you've got that early detection going on. Donna, one of my colleagues, is going to be talking a little bit more around that too, so to sort of help you to understand that a little bit more. So that was the process that I showed you in the toolkit. It's a very simple process. It's nothing too complicated there, and like I say, it can be applied to a lot of other areas of health and safety. And one of the other areas where we've got some concern is around people working in and around workplace transport. Last year, 2013, we actually had 4 people die from being hit by fork hoists. We had 80 people actually seriously harmed by either being hit by a fork hoist or being injured whilst driving the fork hoist. And so if you've got this type of piece of equipment in your workplace, there are some simple things that need to be considered and done to ensure that people are safe whilst operating those. But it's not just the fork hoist, it's also vehicles coming into your inward and outward goods areas, the unloading of those trucks. These are the common areas where people are getting hurt. The simple thing of getting in and out of a truck, the number of people have actually fallen and actually sustained serious injuries from that. So with that in mind, what are the sort of things that we'd expect you to be looking for? Well, you can boil it down to three areas. It's around having a safe site, so it's about the design of the site. So if you can actually have like a one-way system or demarcated areas where you're separating the pedestrian away from the vehicle, that's always going to be a far better way than relying on human beings making decisions about when's a good time to go out, and vehicle operators always being vigilant around who's in and around them. Now, they should always be doing that anyway, but if you can engineer it so that people are isolated from the vehicle, that's going to be always far better. And then it's around the vehicle itself. Is it the right type of vehicle for the job that's being done? Is it well maintained? Does the operator do regular pre-start checks to make sure that the brakes are working and that there's no other defects that would cause the safety of that machine? And then finally, it's around the driver, the competency of the driver, their ability to drive that vehicle safely, operate safely in and around the workplace. So keep vehicles and people apart, have clear site rules and enforce them, make sure that loads are secure, and avoid the need to actually work on heights on vehicles. A number of those accidents with fork hoists have actually been people where they've been using the fork hoist to access an area of height, and they've been standing either on the forks themselves or a pallet that's on the forks, and just looking at a couple of faces that are sort of cringing at that, thinking, who would do that? This stuff does happen. Obviously, quite clearly, it's not the safe way of doing it. But we've also seen, unfortunately, people who've tried to do the right thing and actually have the properly designed man cage that fits to the forklift. But they've missed out a critical step of actually making sure it's anchored or secured to the mast of the fork hoist, and the fork hoist actually tilted slightly. The man cage actually slipped off the forks, and down came the person that was in the man cage as well, and got quite seriously. In fact, I think that was a fatality up in Auckland a few years back. So again, it just shows health and safety is always around vigilance. I guess my real word for caution, if you're sitting in this room thinking, yeah, I think we've got health and safety pretty much sorted, I'm pretty confident we've got all the paperwork and we've got systems in place and what have you, and you're starting to feel that little bit of comfort, be afraid. You've got to almost be paranoid of health and safety. And I use that word paranoid because I heard it the other day from a senior manager in a large manufacturer only about a month or so ago, and he takes health and safety very, very seriously. And in fact, his knowledge of health and safety was quite impressive for a general manager. And he basically says, I am paranoid around health and safety, and he said it's a healthy paranoia, because all it means is you're constantly questioning, are we doing enough as we can do? Not making assumptions that everything's going to be okay and that people know what they're doing. People don't always know what they're doing, and I think having that healthy paranoia does keep you asking those questions, which leads you to probably a better outcome. Noise, 59% of the serious claims that ACC receive in the metal manufacturing industry relate to noise. Again, it's a hazard that you're probably all familiar with. The default protection for noise that people tend to use is hearing protection. This is a study that ACC did back in 2009, and I just want to really highlight to you actually the bottom point, which is then around the percentage of people that actually weren't wearing the hearing protection properly. So if you look at the earmuffs, 54% of the earmuffs weren't being worn properly, and 47% of earplugs weren't inserted properly. Now, if you're not wearing those things properly, it's not affording you any protection. So I guess it's no surprise that 59% of the claims are related to noise. If that the most common thing that we are using as our only line of defence against noise is people wearing hearing protection. So I guess the challenge back is around applying the hierarchy of control. And it's about seriously looking at the eliminate and isolate first, and pausing quite a bit on those two elements before going to minimisation, which is wearing hearing protection. Because there are some things that can be done that can reduce the noise level. Actually, there are some companies that have a policy of buying quiet, which means when they are purchasing machines, part of their specification is purposely buying machines that are operating below the 85 dBA, so managing the risk of exposure of noise within their workplace from source, which is great. A lot of times that's not possible. And then there's other engineering controls that can be done to actually mitigate the level of noise mitigate the level of exposure that's within that workplace. And ultimately, it still may end up being that people have to wear hearing protection. But if they do, you need to make sure that you're providing people with training, that you're monitoring their health as regards from exposure to noise and those sort of things. So there's a lot more sort of moving parts to that you need to make sure that you're doing. Similar thing to respiratory protection. Again, both noise and airborne contaminants are things which inspectors, when they come into your workplace, are going to be asking for some assurance from you around, have you identified these risks in your workplace? How are you controlling them? Are you looking at controls at the eliminate, isolate level of the hierarchy rather than just defaulting to minimisation? Again, respiratory protection, inhalation is probably the biggest source of actually getting harmful things into your body. So again, remember we talked about the 600 to 900 people a year dying from prematurely from occupationally acquired diseases. A lot of it's going to be because it's the stuff that they've breathed in. So if you're a woodworking place, the wood dust. If you're a metal place, it could be welding fumes. And if in other places it could be exposure to isocyanates or solvents or neurotoxins and things like that. So again, we're looking as regards what's your knowledge of the hazards that are in your workplace. You should be telling us, yes, the most hazardous thing that we've got is actually over here, which is this particular product. We've got an extraction unit here that takes it from source, but we've also provided our operators with up-to-date training. We also do health monitoring. Those are the sort of things that the inspector wants to hear from you. If we're hearing that, oh no, we didn't know that was a problem, or I wasn't aware of that, or oh, Joe knows what it is because he's been using that for years, then again, we're not getting that level of assurance, and so it's more likely the inspector's going to be asking more questions to sort of find out actually how poorly managed this particular hazard has been in your workplace, and that may then lead to some directive action from the inspector. I mentioned before that we're at a sort of unique time as regards the amount of attention that health and safety are getting. These are the two pieces of document that sort of leading the reforms. So one is the report from the Independent Task Force, and then finally the Working Safer is the blueprint that the reforms are based on. I mentioned before that WorkSafe as a new agency was part of that reforms. Obviously the other key change is actually around the legislation. So a lot of you may be aware that there's new legislation or a new bill currently before the Select Committee in Parliament, and probably a number of you may have also put submissions in, and I'm sure you may be aware that other organisations may have done that too. This is pretty much showing where things are tracking. So it's proposed that the law will be passed midway through this year. With it being acted, we can't get anything more precise than the third quarter of this year. I think they're sort of edging their bets, because I guess what they've underestimated is actually the number of submissions that are coming through and how long it's taking to go through the Select Committee. So things have sort of dragged on a little bit longer than we hoped. But the reality is new legislation is coming our way. It's based on the Australian legislation with obviously some New Zealand tweaks and obviously the effects of the consultation that's gone on in New Zealand. But what it does mean is it'll help to clearly define what the responsibilities are within the workplace. So we're going to be moving away from the traditional employer-employee relationship definition within the Act, so something that's called a person who controls a business or undertaking, or peekaboo or PCBU. Those are sort of the phrases that have been used at the moment. And basically all that does is it tries to simplify that if you are a business and that you are doing things for hire and reward, that you've got responsibility not just for the people that you employ, but other people that are affected by your business or your undertaking. And so it makes it a far wider sweeping requirement, but it makes it a lot clearer that as soon as you know you're a business undertaking, you know you've got responsibilities. It also recognises that you're going to have organisations that are co-locating in some areas, say like in a construction site where you've got contractor relationships, or say in manufacturing it could be someone who's supplying or providing a service that's part of your manufacturing process. Again, it's then putting a responsibility on both those organisations to be working collaboratively, sharing information, and actually jointly making sure that the risks are being managed that can affect both their organisations and the people that work for them. So to wrap things up, what this slide here sort of summarises the areas that the inspector's looking for, and I'm hoping that you'll have access to this slide because it might be a useful sort of checklist for you to take back to your workplace. So basically, when the inspector comes, the tidiness of your workplace is it's not a scientific thing, but it is a bit of a barometer of how well health and safety is managed within your workplace. A very cluttered workplace means that it's probably disorganised, and if it's disorganised, that means the health and safety is not going to be perhaps as organised as it should be. But also, an untidy workplace is actually quite hazardous because slip, trips and falls, and it's also not a very efficient way to operate your business too. If people having to move around things, stumble around things, not be able to locate things because they're not stored in the right places, there's some efficiency issues there too. But also, making sure that your machinery is well maintained and correctly safeguarded, operators are trained, supervised and are competent, that you've got safety procedures for that cleaning, clearing and maintenance of machinery, and that you're also looking at those other issues such as noise, workplace transport, airborne contaminants, making sure that you've considered those risks, that you've got adequate control measures in place, and that you're providing your workers with information for them to understand the risks that could occur to their health if they don't follow the control measures properly. So making sure you've got the right paperwork in place, so having the hazard and risk assessments, the health surveillance records, maintenance and test records, and also the written instructions that you've got for employees for covering. And again, take into account that literacy levels in a number of workplaces can be quite low, and so large manuals and relying on people just to read and then sign at the bottom to say that they've understood isn't necessarily an effective way to communicate key messages across to people. So you may need to look at other ways in which to get those across, be it through discussions, by using pictures, by using simpler language and things like that. So finally, this is the motto that we're using at the moment in our branding. So make safety our strength. In fact, some of you may have seen it at some of the rugby tests last year at some of our larger stadiums. This is what we're going to be sort of striving with a lot of our messages. And I guess what it also means is that everyone's got a role to play, not just us as a regulator, but the New Zealand workplaces, the industry themselves. And as a regulator, we recognise that, and you will be seen as a lot more working in partnership with industry to actually solve some of these problems that we're facing here. Thanks very much for listening, and as Catherine says, I'm happy to take questions at the end. Cheers.